March 17, 1943. North Atlantic. Convoy HX-229 steamed through darkness. 42 merchant ships. 8 escort vessels. Within 72 hours, German U-boats would sink 21 ships. Over 500 men would die. The wolfpack tactics were winning. But inside a wooden hut in Hut 8, Bletchley Park, England, RADIO operators were tracking something the Germans thought was invisible: their own transmissions. The hunters were about to become the hunted. Between 1939 and 1943, German U-boats sank over 2,600 Allied ships in the Atlantic. The convoy system was failing. Merchant sailors called it the killing time. The problem was simple. You cannot fight what you cannot find. U-boats traveled submerged by day, surfaced only at night to recharge batteries and transmit position reports to headquarters. British Admiralty records show that in early 1943, the Allies were losing the Battle of the Atlantic. Prime Minister Winston Churchill later wrote, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. But a group of radio operators, technicians, and cryptanalysts were developing a technique so effective it would turn the tide of the entire Atlantic campaign. They called it high-frequency direction finding. The sailors called it Huff-Duff. This is the story of how signal intelligence operators tracked and exposed German submarine positions using their own radio transmissions, documented through Royal Navy records, declassified Admiralty reports, and used Navy Historical Center archives. The technique began with a problem identified in 1940. German U-boats operated in coordinated wolfpacks, a tactic developed by Admiral Dönitz. Intelligence reports from the Operational Intelligence Center show that between 8 and 20 submarines would gather in patrol lines across convoy routes, guided by radio transmissions from U-boat headquarters in Lorient, France. Royal Navy Commander Rodger Winn, head of the submarine tracking room at the Admiralty, documented the pattern in internal memos now held at the National Archives in Kew. U-boats had to surface to receive orders. They had to transmit position reports. Every transmission created a radio signal that traveled in all directions. The revelation was this: if multiple listening stations detected the same transmission, they could calculate the submarine's position through triangulation. According to Royal Navy technical bulletins from 1941, the system required 3 or more direction-finding stations separated by hundreds of miles. Each station would measure the bearing of an incoming U-boat transmission. Where the bearing lines intersected was the submarine's location. The method was not new. Radio direction finding existed since World War I. What changed was the scale, speed, and coordination. The equipment was called the FH-4 High-Frequency Direction Finder, developed by Robert Watson Watt and refined by the Telecommunications Research Establishment. Technical specifications from the Royal Navy Handbook of 1942 describe a rotating loop antenna system that could detect radio signals and determine their direction of origin. Installation began in 1941. According to Admiralty fleet orders, Britain established coastal stations at Wick in Scotland, Lydd in Kent, Land's End in Cornwall, and Gibraltar. Canada built stations at Harbour Grace, Newfoundland, and Hartland Point, Nova Scotia. The United States constructed facilities at Cheltenham, Maryland, and Winter Harbor, Maine. Each station was staffed by trained radio operators working 12-hour shifts. Their job: listen for U-boat transmissions on German naval frequencies, measure the bearing, and immediately telephone the results to the submarine tracking room in London. The process had to be fast. U-boat transmissions typically lasted less than 30 seconds. Operators needed to identify the signal, lock the bearing, and report within minutes. The Operational Intelligence Center occupied a concrete basement beneath the Admiralty building in London. Commander Rodger Winn ran the submarine tracking room with a staff of 12 analysts. Their method is documented in Admiralty records declassified in 1972. When direction-finding stations reported a U-boat transmission, analysts would plot the bearings on a large map of the Atlantic. Where two or more bearing lines crossed indicated the submarine's position, accurate to within 50 miles. Patrick Beasley, who served in the tracking room, later wrote in his memoir, Very Special Intelligence, published in 1977, "We could plot the position of a U-boat within an hour of its transmission. The Germans never realized we were reading their movements in near real time. The impact was measurable." Admiralty convoy routing records from 1942 show that once a U-boat concentration was identified, convoys could be rerouted around the threat. In March 1943 alone, 16 convoys were successfully diverted based on HF intelligence. But locating submarines was only half the solution. The next step was destruction. In 1943, the Royal Navy formed specialized anti-submarine groups built around escort carriers. These hunter-killer groups would be vectored toward U-boat positions identified by direction finding. U.S. Navy records document the effectiveness. The escort carrier USS Bogue, operating with destroyer escorts, sank 6 U-boats between March and May 1943. All 6 were initially located through HF bearings. The Royal Navy's 2nd Escort Group, commanded by Captain Frederick Walker, used direction finding combined with radar and sonar to hunt submarines. Walker's after-action reports held at the National Maritime Museum detail the technique: detect a U-boat transmission, obtain a bearing, proceed at high speed to the location, then use sonar to localize and attack. Between February and June 1943, Walker's group sank 6 U-boats using this method. His report from May 1943 states, HFDF has proved the single most valuable tool for locating enemy submarines. It provides the initial detection that allows us to bring other sensors to bear. German U-boat command began to notice. Dönitz's war diary from May 1943, captured after the war and now in the Bundesarchiv, records increasing concern about Allied interception capabilities. By mid-1943, German naval intelligence suspected the Allies were tracking U-boats through radio transmissions. Interrogation reports of captured British sailors, documented in German naval archives, reveal questioning about direction-finding capabilities. On May 24, 1943, Admiral Dönitz ordered all U-boats to minimize radio transmissions and use only short pre-coded signals. His directive, preserved in captured documents, stated, "Enemy appears capable of detecting our radio traffic. Limit all transmissions to absolute necessity." But the order came too late. Use strategic bombing. Survey interviews with German naval officers after the war confirmed they never fully understood the extent of Allied direction-finding networks. Corvetting Peter Kremer, commander of U-333, wrote in his post-war memoir, U-Boat Commander, published in 1984, "We knew the British had some radio detection ability, but we never imagined the precision. They were tracking individual boats across the entire Atlantic." The reduction in German radio traffic did decrease detections, but created another problem for U-Boat Command. Coordinating wolfpack attacks became nearly impossible without radio communication. May 1943 marked a decisive month. German records show 41 U-boats were sunk, the highest monthly total of the war. Analysis of the sinkings, conducted by the Royal Navy's Anti-Submarine Warfare Division and documented in their 1946 assessment, reveals that 27 of the 41 U-boats were initially detected through HF bearings. Aircraft, radar, or sonar completed the localization and attack, but direction finding provided the crucial first detection. On May 24th, Dönitz withdrew U-boats from the North Atlantic convoy routes. His war diary entry, now in the Bundesarchiv, states, "We have suffered losses which can no longer be justified by the few sinkings achieved. The enemy has rendered the North Atlantic untenable." This withdrawal is considered by naval historians as the turning point of the Battle of the Atlantic. The Allies had won, not through a single battle, but through systematic application of intelligence technology. Post-war analysis by the U.S. Naval Institute calculated that HF-related intelligence contributed to the sinking or damage of over 100 German and Italian submarines between 1942 and 1945. The technology was only effective because of the men operating it. Personnel records from the Royal Navy and U.S. Navy show that direction-finding operators underwent months of training to recognize German transmission patterns, operate the equipment under time pressure, and maintain accuracy. Petty Officer Raymond Hart, who served at the Scarborough Direction Finding Station in Yorkshire, provided testimony to the Imperial War Museum in 1985. He described the work. "We listened constantly for German naval frequencies. When we heard a transmission, we had perhaps 20 seconds to get a bearing before it ended. Every second counted. We knew that convoy lives depended on our accuracy." The coordination between stations was managed through dedicated telephone lines to London. If one station's bearing was questionable, operators would note it as doubtful in their reports. The tracking room would weight reliable bearings more heavily in their calculations. This human judgment, combined with technical precision, created a system the Germans could not defeat. They could shorten transmissions, but they could not eliminate radio communication entirely. Every transmission was a potential exposure. By war's end, the Allied direction-finding network included over 100 stations around the Atlantic, Mediterranean, and Pacific. Post-war assessments by both British and American naval intelligence concluded that HFDF was one of the three most important intelligence tools of the Atlantic campaign, alongside radar and cryptanalysis. The technique saved thousands of merchant sailors' lives by enabling convoy routing around U-boat concentrations. It contributed to the destruction of over 100 Axis submarines. And it demonstrated a fundamental principle. In modern warfare, signals intelligence could be as decisive as firepower. The radio operators who tracked those transmissions, working in coastal stations and basement tracking rooms, turned German communication into German vulnerability. They proved that in the battle for the Atlantic, sometimes the most powerful weapon was the ability to listen.